How are you doing, everybody? My name is Tom N5HYP. I am a member of the Irving Radio Club. I'm a member of the Dallas Radio Club. I'm a member of AMSAT, uh, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I've been a ham for 40 years this coming summer, so that's kind of cool. I love doing presentations like this because I like to be able to communicate my love and excitement for amateur radio satellites. All right. And by the way, that is an image of me in my front yard, uh, doing a linear satellite pass with my FT847 uh, back a couple of years ago. But we're going to talk about FM radio satellites today. Uh, we're going to talk a little bit about AMSAT, the Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, but I'm going to really dive into what you need to know just to basically get your whistle wet on maybe getting started with this rather fun and exciting part of the hobby. AMSAT, the Radio Amateur Satellite Corporation, has been around for more than 50 years. I'm wearing a 50-year T-shirt or polo shirt here, and they've been around for about 56 now. And there's a bunch of different satellites that have been launched over the years and continue to be launched. Some of them are FM repeaters. Some of them are linear transponders for SSB and CW. Some of them have digital packet. PSK 31 has also been even on a couple of satellites. APRS is on several different satellites, including the International Space Station, and there's also some telemetry only, downlink only stations. This is a list of the most of the currently active satellites right now that are available for some form of two-way communications. Starting with at the top, AO7, which was originally launched in 1973, all the way down to um, SO124 Hades R from AMSAT Spain, which is an FM transponder, which was just launched and activated a couple of weeks ago. Many of them are what are known as CubeSats. Uh, uh, it's a standard form factor based on a 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter cube with about a kilogram or so of weight. It makes it easier for launch providers by having a common form factor to be able to include small satellites as secondary payloads on their launch vehicles, especially if they're using it for ballast for larger satellites. There's internally many different boards in AMSAT's world. We created a set of four boards, the transmitter, the receiver, the IHU, and the battery board, and those are standard on all our CubeSats, but we also allowed four different boards that colleges and universities could use and to run their own satellites. And then our telemetry downlink made it possible for folks like Virginia Tech, who had a camera on several of our birds. Iowa State, Penn State had a gyro experiment. Uh, Virginia Tech had some radiation effects experiments as well. And that got us some free rides on a couple of different NASA educational launch of nano satellite programs. And these are a couple of the programs that are yet upcoming in for AMSAT North America. Fox Plus. Our current version of the FM satellites has been known as Fox, and which the previous one was Echo, and so now they're trying to redesign them for with newer components and such like that to keep FM satellites up in the air. But then several Gulf, greater orbit, larger footprint series are in the offerings right now. And then we have offered linear transponder board stacks, those three stacks at the bottom of the cube, to other universities. University of Washington got the first one. University of Maine, their MESAT one, got the second one. And if you know a college that is doing an aerospace satellite type program and would like to have us partner with you, AMSAT will give you one of those board stacks. And there's AMSAT organizations all around the world, AMSAT Germany, AMSAT Australia, even in China. There's a group that defines themselves under AMSAT. None of these are connected. We're all autonomous, but it's just a worldwide group of satellite enthusiasts. So getting started in FM satellites, it's a great entry point for new hams because you can operate amateur radio satellites with a technician license. The interesting point is the satellite questions don't show up until you get to the extra class, or the really heavy ones don't show up until you get to the extra class uh, license. You do need to know what equipment you need to do this. How do you know where the satellites are? How do I know what frequencies they'll be on? How do I track a satellite? What do I say? And tips for best operating practices is what we're going to talk about here. In general, you would want some form of dual band radio or radios. All of our satellites right now are operating on either 2 meters or 70 centimeters. You so you either need a dual band radio that can hopefully do full duplex, which means you can talk on one band and listen on the other. Or you could get away with two radios to do that. And to be really honest, you can do it with a radio that maybe does 2 meters on one side and then 70 centimeters on the other side and doesn't do full duplex, which is admittedly what I did for the first 4 or 5 years before I got a different radio. However, there are disadvantages to that, and one of them is the fact that you can't uh, hear when you're stepping on somebody and you can't hear when they're stepping on you. And you can't even tell whether you're even making it in. So full duplex is a really great thing to do because you want to be able to hear the satellite and then hear yourself coming through the satellite. And if I could get this video to work, I could show you that in a demo later on. Full duplex radios like the D72 by Kenwood, several others. I do have a listing that uh, uh, WB9EWK, Pat Stoddard Phoenix has put out that lists all available satellite capable radios, some of the caveats for both handheld, for both mobile radios, and for uh, uh, dual band all mode radios. You know, the mobiles make good satellite rigs too. You know, the Kenwood series, some of the ICOMs are really great for this as well. And then, of course, there's some big radios like the 9700 and some of the older radios like TS2000s. And like I said, I have an FT847 by Yaesu that's about 25 years old now, but it's a wonderful satellite radio. And or you could do two radios like this. You could do a couple of 817s, 818s. One does the 2 meter side, one does the 70 centimeter side. It works out very well. My friend uh, um, uh, Jack A5VZ down in Arlington has this, and it works really nicely for them, even at 5 watts. You really want to have the best receive station you can get. Don't be fooled by YouTube videos that show people trying to do satellite contacts with a rubber duck or a short whip. You will get very frustrated and it won't be fun. So you need something that has some form of forward gain, like the Arrow antenna. I have one of those. It's a dual band, dual feed. That's me on the coast of Maine trying to work some contacts across the pond. Didn't get that to happen, but it is possible. The elk antenna, which is a log periodic that works on both 2 meters and 70 centimeters. It's a single feed antenna with a single wire out. VE2ZAZ has a nice design online. It's available. It's a kind of an arrow-esque antenna that you can build yourself. And of course, Fort Worth, Skin Britain, WA5 VJB, his cheap Yagi. Go Google that. WA5 VJB cheap Yagi, or look on his website, wa5vjb.com. He's got a section, a file section, and it has a PDF that describes how to build his antenna for about 20 bucks, maybe a little more now with inflation from when he did that. Um, Need to make sure you have the right antenna connections for your radio. Um, Basically, the picture here is saying, hey, have an antenna that's, and if you need adapters, have an adapter that's easy to connect to your radio, especially if it's an SMA. I don't like the really thin connections like you can see on the bottom one with the don't do this sign. I've got one anyway. Other good things to take along or to use while you're doing satellite passes is a voice recorder, maybe a compass or your cell phone to be able to do satellite passes, headphones or some external speakers for audio adapting, uh, or to be able to feed both a headphone and a speaker, or headphone and the recorder. Duplexers, and we'll talk about that later on. Um, Satellite tracking software apps for your phone or a tablet, or for PCs. And you can also, there are various ways on the web to be able to do satellite pass predictions. For the iOS, SatSat it's okay. I love GoSat Watch for the iOS. It's got great graphics, nice predictions. You can look forward. You can select the satellites you want. Another available for the ISS, but also available for Android, is ISS Detector. And by the way, SatSat I think is free. I'm trying to remember. GoSat Watch is 10 bucks. Don't have to ever buy anything again, no ads. ISS Detector is free for just the ISS. Spend $2.99 and get the extra add-ons. So you get the amateur radio satellites and the visible satellites and such like that. WANT Sat Tracker is a good one as well, although I don't really use it. I like either GoSat Watch or ISS Detector. And like I said, ISS Detector works on both iOS and Android. For computers and Macs, the best tracking programs out there is SatPC32, although it is more than 25 years old. The developer from Germany continues to support it and update it occasionally with new radios and new such like that. You can control both. You can control two radios and an as-L rotor with it. And same for Mac Doppler for Mac OS X. There's a couple of web-based satellite prediction things that I really like. N2YO is pretty good. I also do like AMSAT Argentina's PASS program on the web. It is also quite nice because it also gives you Doppler shifts as well as uh, azimuth elevation, and so you can tell what actual operating frequency you're on or supposed to be on right now. And of course, there's how I got started, which was just the basic AMSAT text-based prediction. You enter in your grid square or latitude and longitude, compute that, and select which satellite you want to track and how many passes you want to track. And it'll give you the AOS time when it comes over the horizon, the time of closest approach or max elevation, and its azimuth and elevation for that, and the LOS, the time it drops below the horizon again. And then there are some satellites that do have schedules. they're not on all the time. And DF7ET out in Germany, when a flock of satellites recently was released called Tevel from Israel, he created this little website that keeps track of all the schedules that might be on Twitter, they might be other places, and tells you when and for how long that particular satellite schedule is going to be on. The current set of Tevels that that I show here are they have deorbited, but there's a new set that just was launched about 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. It's 9 satellites. When they finish commissioning, they'll all be FM satellites, and they'll all be running on the same set of frequencies up and down. So they'll only turn one or two on at a time. And this is a great place to figure that out. Okay, so he said, you're talking about big words here. So we're going to talk about the concept of a pass. All of our satellites are operating in low Earth orbit, which is from a couple hundred miles up to a couple thousand miles up. The lowest amateur radio functioning satellite per se is the ISS, which is about 260 miles up in orbit. A pass for the ISS takes about 10 and a half minutes from horizon to horizon. The highest functioning satellite we have right now is RS-44, which is a Russian satellite with a linear transponder. It's up at about 1,000 miles. Passes from horizon to horizon can be up to 23 minutes long. So that's really about the longest you got. We had one satellite that was doing a an interesting mode that was kind of similar to FT8 that was up at about 3,600 miles, and that had pass times was above the horizon for like an hour and a half at a crack. But that one went dead about a year ago. So you can see on this image, if you can see the red circle, that's the footprint of the ISS at 260 miles or so. 250 miles there. Can see most of the US. But now this next one is AO7, which is at about 900 miles. See a much bigger footprint. Folks on the East Coast of the United States can hit stations in Western Europe through AO7 or RS-44. And this was the Green Cube satellite that was at 3,600 miles that had a really nice hour and a half footprint time over us, but unfortunate, and that was a great DX satellite, but it succumbed to the rigors of the Van Allen belt radiation up at that altitude and died about a year and a half into its lifespan. So because all of our satellites are dual band, except for the APRS satellites, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But if it's a dual band satellite, there will be an uplink frequency and there will be a downlink frequency, and they will be on different bands. APRS is a little different, like the ISS when it does APRS on 145.825. It is both up and down. So you only need a single band 2-meter radio for that. There is Doppler shift, just like we have with sounds like a train engine or a truck engine as it's or a truck horn as it's passing by. Satellites radio has Doppler shift as well. It's the amount of shift is basically predicated on how fast it's going in relation coming to us and going away. But the ratio is always the same, but the shift gets wider the higher in frequency you goes. 2 meters has a 3.5 kilohertz plus or minus frequency shift. 70 centimeters has about a 9 kilohertz plus and minus frequency shift. If we were up at 13 centimeters, 1.26, that has about a 25 kilohertz plus and minus frequency shift. So, and this shows the ISS, and the Doppler shift will vary based on, when a if you're hearing a train far away, and as it's kind of getting closer, you don't hear a lot of change in the train horn. But if it's coming right next to you and blowing its horn, you hear that change in frequency happen much faster. That's what this chart is showing. The red line is very close to the horizon pass. The blue line is if it's almost a direct vertical over the overhead pass. So, and this kind of shows how you have to deal with Doppler shift if you're listening to a UHF satellite, and what you would do with your radio, since FM radios in the United States, for the most part, except for the Baofengs and the Chinese, have frequency steps of 5 kilohertz. So FM, of course, is fairly broad because of the way the discriminators work. So uh, 5 kilohertz Doppler shift is okay on a, or 5 kilohertz frequency steps is okay on a radio. So this kind of shows how one would correct for Doppler listening on UHF from the beginning of the pass to the end of the pass. AOS, meaning acquisition of signal, LOS, loss of signal. And this is kind of how I would program my radio to do an uplink on 2 meters and a downlink on 70 centimeters. And that gives me maybe an extra step or so either way, but it's still is helpful to be able to have that. And now if I was transmitting on UHF, this is the kind of the mind-bending part. We actually have to do Doppler backwards. The satellite thinks it's standing still and we're moving. So to it, our frequency would be, if we held stable, our frequency would look like it was shifting from high to low for it. So how we deal with it, because the satellite's standing still, we have to adjust our UHF Doppler backwards, starting off at -10 at AOS and going to +10 at LOS. And this is kind of how I would maybe approach programming my radio for that. And you'll also note that some satellites have CSS, that's CTCSS tones. On average, 67 hertz is a standard, although there is at least one or two that have different tone frequencies, and there's a couple that have none. So what frequencies do I need to be on? Well, it depends upon on the satellite, whether it's a VU or a UV. Or there even has been some UHF up and like 10 or 15 meters down. In fact, AO7 from 1973 has a mode of VHF uplink and 70 centimeter and 10-meter downlink. And there are satellite subbands from the IARU and the ITU on all sorts of different bands from the high end of HF up. FM satellites are easy to hear, easy to work, easy to aim your antenna, and easy to on the credit card. Well, kind of, but that's okay. This is kind of a sample frequency chart from the amsat.org website showing the uplink and downlink frequencies for PO101, which is Diwata 2, which is a Philippines satellite that sometimes does APRS, sometimes does a voice repeater. If you're an AMSAT member, you can download, which is not totally current anymore, their satellite frequency guide. However, the most current information is on the amsat.org website, satellite information, communications satellites, and then you can get a frequency chart and I'll show you that again at the end of the presentation here, a frequency chart for both FM satellites and for linear transponder. And I'll explain a little bit later what a linear transponder is. So anyway, with the pass, you got to follow from AOS to LOS, and you need to know what azimuth, what location on the compass will it come over the horizon, which direction it's moving, what is its highest point of elevation in the sky, and what as azimuth direction that highest point will be, and then what's the azimuth of the point in which the satellite drops below the horizon. And yeah, it's a little overstated, but we do have to worry about polarity on like yeah, like for instance, if you're using an FM repeater in town here, you need to have a vertically polarized antenna because everybody knows that if you try to hit a terrestrial repeater with a horizontal antenna, you lose at least 20 dB of RF because of the cross polarization. Well, this happens with satellites too. However, you're complicated by the fact that the satellite may be tumbling or the antenna is changing orientation in relation to you as the pass progresses. So you will have to do some motion on your antenna, whether following satellite spin or whether just following satellite antenna orientation. Or in the case of the ISS, hardware even gets in the way and you can completely lose the ISS signal momentarily just because of maybe the antennas are being passed in front of by one of the other modules or even the solar panels. And for the most part, for FM passes, we do really quick QSOs. No, if you only got 10 minutes of a pass for the ISS crossband, and there's 20 people on all trying to make contacts, you don't want to be doing a rag chew. Call sign and grid square, and acknowledging that is pretty much what you need to do. Oops, I hitting the right button. Um, and of course, this is a United States grid square map. And of course, if you're doing VHF, UHF weak signal work, you know about grid squares. So it's the same thing for satellite. And there are awards for getting VUCC 100 grid squares on satellite. The Fred Fish Memorial Award is all 488 grid squares on the continental US. And there are folks that have done that on satellite as well. Unfortunately, we have no geostationary or geosynchronous satellites like the folks in Europe, Africa, and Western Asia have with the QO100 bird, which is a hosted payload on a Qataran communications satellite. So working in pass, you want to prepare your radio with the correct frequencies. Hopefully have memories, pre-programmed headphones to minimize feedback and or a separated speaker. Have ability to record satellite passes. Pick a satellite to work. Pick a location where you have clear or the best view of the horizon and the sky. And then these are other things that, of course, just how you would how you would facilitate on in a pass. And of course, some people think you got to have three hands to do this. And actually, you'll note something kind of novel about him. I'm not sure how he's going to get through to his radio because his microphone for his headset is up over his head. My best advice before you get started is to listen a lot to see how this all works. And it's because the fact that it goes pretty fast, get used to call signs that you hear and how it works and how people kind of will put out a call and other people will answer that call. No rag chewing on FM satellites. And again, this is just kind of more best practices. You can take a quick look at that, and then I'm going to Press on here. Of course, there's other things to do, FM. Um, all mode radios like my FT847 over here, or the 9700 or the TS2000 or some of the older all mode radios make good satellite rigs. We're hoping that a Yaesu rig coming out probably at Hamvention will have some level of, they say it has dual listen capability. I Nobody quite knows if that means it is full duplex or it just can listen to two things at the same time. Again, I mentioned about the 817, 818. That new Yaesu radio we think is supposed to replace one or t'other of this pair. Software defined radios like the old FunCube dongle or Lime SDR or um, HackRF's SDRs, some of which can do transmit, but you got to amplify the signal if you're going to transmit. And because most of these are putting out milliwatts, you really would like a couple of watts. Um, Satellite pass predictions, we talked about the software before. And uh, HRD, Ham Radio Deluxe, does have satellite tracking capabilities in it. SDR, um, uh, S, SDR Radio Console also has a satellite mode to it as well, and it can control a couple of radios. So it's a possibility. I have used my FunCube dongle as a receiver and my FT847 as a transmitter, controlled by SAT-PC32, and worked passes that way. And APRS is a capable thing. The D74 or the D75 from Kenwood, other radios. Yaesu makes some. The D72 does as well. Some of the Kenwood radios, the mobiles, do APRS. That is a great mode for digipeating through the ISS, and several other APRS capable satellites. Of course, there's data downlinking. This is an example of AMSAT UK's FunCube dashboard for their FunCube transponder satellites. You they Their data 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 carrier brings satellite information like solar panel voltages and currents and panel temperatures and such like that. And when you downlink it, the software uploads to a data warehouse so they can accumulate full orbit data out of your reception and somebody else's reception and somebody else's reception. Uh, I recommend this book, although it is from 2020. It's available on the AMSAT.org website. It is Getting Started with Amateur Satellites. It is dated in some ways because it talks about satellites that no longer exist and doesn't know anything about satellites that hadn't been launched yet. However, it has a whole lot of great information, taking what I've talked about here and expanding it wildly. So you can come away reading that book end to end and know quite a bit about how amateur radio satellites work, how you work them, and how you can improve your station to be able to more effectively transmit. So, and you can find a lot of good info on the AMSAT.org satellite info page, including uh, the satellite frequency guides under the communications satellites and a satellite status page to show you which satellites are currently active and hearable. And if you have an idea what the mode is, you can really interpret the especially if it shows red, that means it's not heard when they're expecting it. Blue usually meaning it's some form of voice or communications two-way is heard. For on In relation to the ISS FM, if there's a little purple square, it means somebody has heard an astronaut, which is not common, but it does happen. And of course, a benefit of being an AMSAT member is the AMSAT Journal, which is a nice little technical guide, but also just a lot of fun things about roving and satellite operations. This month they're talking about debris tracking by NORAD and other organizations. So we're going to walk outside, and we can ask some questions, and I can show you my sat rig a little closer. So hold on.
Okay, we're outside in the backyard. You're looking at my Arrow antenna, which I have. A friend did a 3D printed mount for the camera shoe, so I could mount the camera. I can flip. I can change the elevation to track a pass. Let me loosen that up. Gonna make you seasick. That's okay. Don't ask me why I couldn't flip the camera. I've done this before. Got a couple of other fun things that I've included on my tripod. That's a dual band FM amplifier, so it can actually work on either 2 meters or 70 centimeters. I'm not using it. I don't have it connected up right now. I do have my D72 with a speaker on the floor to separate the audio from the microphone on the antenna. I have another amplifier on here that I mostly use as a 2-meter preamp. That's a 2-meter amplifier, but I can get about 20 watts out of it if I want to. One thing that I didn't talk about in this presentation, but I mentioned in the video one that I was going to do, which was on some radios, you have significant problems with descents, meaning when you're transmitting on 2 meters and receiving on 70 centimeters or vice versa. I have an ICOM W32A, which is a really sensitive front end. However, it's almost too sensitive. If I get down into the RF jungle that is Cedar Hill, where all the broadcast antennas are, I can't hear a darn thing because the whole front end is swamped. And if I transmit on 2 meters with that radio and try to listen on 70 centimeters, I can't hear anything either. So, and I even have some issues at times with the Kenwood D72, although it is a good radio for satellite because it doesn't have a lot of descents, but I find it helpful sometimes to use duplexers as filters. So from the W32, I'm running into a little, I'm using the little 10-watt duplexer that Arrow makes, feeding one side into the UHF to a UHF duplexer and out to the UHF input on the antenna. And I'm feeding the VHF side and coming out to the VHF antenna on here. And especially when doing linear transponders with my 847, that really does help a lot. I also have an SSB electronics preamp for 70 centimeters. I used to have some ARR preamps that were like for 25 watts, and I blew out the front, blew them out like 2 or 3 times, and I got tired of sending them off for repair, so I decided to just spend the money and buy a really good preamp that'll handle 160 watts and not blow up. Another antenna that's a good one for satellite use is the Elk. I mentioned that before. It's a log periodic, so it only has one feed. And of course, the feed points on a log periodic is in the front of an antenna. This works on, you see a lot of people use this, stick it on a pole, and it's a nice little antenna for doing repeaters. But you can also use it for satellites. I'm not as fond of it as I am of the Arrow, but it is a, a decent antenna for the job. And then, of course, like the Kent Britain antenna that I talked about is a really good choice to build.